Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Democracy Tomorrow, the world's gathering place for world citizens from everywhere across the planet. Tonight, we have with us a special guest who's from Bangladesh, but speaking to us from Kolkata, India, um, who will be speaking to us tonight about her work on climate change, what it's like to be a young woman in Bangladesh in 2025, and her hopes and fears for the planet. Um, Most people watching us tonight have probably never been to Bangladesh and probably will never go to Bangladesh. Um, I have had the good fortune of going to Bangladesh, so I can speak from firsthand experience. And our guest tonight, of course, lives there and works there, along with 175 million other Bangladeshis. It's an extraordinary country, and I would indeed urge people to visit and to meet as many Bangladeshis as they can when they're there and enjoy the great food and the great culture and everything else that that country has to offer. Of course, Bangladesh, because of its geographical location, due to no fault of its own, is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to the effects of climate change, whether it's increased storm activity, uh, more and more unpredictable weather patterns and rainfall, more and more unpredictable flooding, which is a standard part of that country, but it's getting worse in more places and it's more and more difficult to predict. And of course, rising sea levels and eventual climate displacement. In many respects, Bangladesh is ground zero for many of the worst impacts of climate change around the world. One of the most severe problems that affects humanity today. So I would be very honored to introduce right now Ms. Afra Nawar Rahman, who's speaking to us from Calcutta, but it's from Chittagong in Bangladesh. Afra, welcome to Democracy Tomorrow.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm more than excited to be here today and welcome all the listeners to hear more about my experience as a woman in this world in Bangladesh and to hear more about what youth are doing today. And we can do more.
Yeah, so Afra, how did you? I mean, you're very young. You're only 20, I believe. Is that right? Are you 20 years old,
Yes,
something like?
I'm
Yeah,
20 years old.
right. And you've already decided to dedicate at least a portion of your life to fighting against the effects of climate change. How did you come to that decision?
Mhm. I feel like this story I have already told so many times because people do get curious on why I care about the climate, really. There's so many things that I could work on and why I chose to do this. Not because it's just a subject that I want to study or something that I've seen people do around me, but something that actually brings out innate interest, a passion within me to work on it, right? And I feel the seed of working for climate change started when I experienced a flash flood that I it was one of the worst floods that I had personally experienced, where I was stuck for a whole night in the middle of the street with like hip length water. And I was like barely in class 6 at that time with just my brother who was in class 2. And that experience while I was sitting there, it made me think, why is this normal for us? Why every year do I have to walk through water to go to school? Why is it like not the same elsewhere? Or why is nobody trying to fix this problem? Right? And that's when I started actually getting more into what's happening in the world. Why is Bangladesh flooding? What can we do to stop it? Right? And that's sort of the story how I got into climate change. But I have more layers to it. As I grew older, I realized it's not as simple as just declogging the drainage system or maybe like just pushing some people to stop using plastic. There's a much bigger picture to it, right? I did some leadership trainings, I got more involved with the communities. So, what the actual problems that were there, what behavioral practices were, discouraging us from actually living in a better community. And that sort of brought me into what I am doing right now today.
Right. So, most people from most places around the world will have never experienced any flooding at all, let alone the catastrophic flooding that routinely affects Bangladesh and has affected Bangladesh probably since independence, if not longer than that. But just describe in more detail. I've been in a few flooding situations around the world doing my work on climate change and stuff, and one of the things that's, to me anyway, extremely difficult to convey to people is just how horrible it is when the streets are flooded, whether even if it's only 30 centimeters, let alone a meter or 2 meters or 5 meters, whatever the case may be. um, with dead animals floating by and lots of trash and human waste and all sorts of disease vectors and the smell and the 30 to 40 degrees Celsius heat, and everything else associated with it. I mean, it's an all encompassing sort of feeling. So maybe you can share just a few more of your experiences like that, because I'm sure you've seen or been in more than one flood in Bangladesh throughout your life so far.
So we have a rising number of floods where, and cyclones too, right? We used to get cyclones only once, maybe in 10 years. And now every year there is at least one cyclone happening, right? If not two or three. And recently, if anybody has been keeping up with the news in South Asia, we had a big flood in Feni, right? Which was because of the glaciers melting and the dams being opened, right? And that flood alone, it was 2 stories in height in some villages, where people, even sitting on the roof, had nowhere to go, no food supply, no clean water for weeks. And in such situations, there were pregnant women there were old people, there were young kids. There was such like everybody was just stuck. There were people even in buildings, right? Not just like clay houses or like bamboo houses, but buildings. They were stuck in the roof, unable to go anywhere, with no food, no internet, no electricity. And this is just one of the recent cases, but this is not like something that's extremely rare here. Whenever flood happens, at least a few villages get affected like this, right? And I believe in that flood, around 60% of Bangladesh was submerged underwater, right? So it was one
Right.
of the big ones. And this does not only just be there for 1 or 2 weeks or there for a few hours, right? The floods that the flash floods especially, and also tidal waves and all of these, this displace a lot of people and like wreck disasters on its path, right? And this like destroys houses, roads, and a lot of people do get displaced because of that. But I think Chattogram has about 30% of Chattogram's migrant population is due to climate displacement, right? And that's a major portion of it. Chattogram has the longest sea beach in the world, and we have lands that's like I think 70% of our land's below 1 meter to the sea level, right? And it's very easy that whenever we're thinking, okay, there's gonna rain happens and then the floods happening at a certain point. But that's not like that in a lot of regions in Chattogram and Bangladesh right now. Because of sea level rise, there's tidal waves that every day floods the area for half the day and then goes back with the tidal and this is something that's honestly like I really don't know how I can explain it in words unless somebody sees it through their own eyes. That it's not just water that people can have fun in. It's disrupting our lifestyle. It's destroying our crops. Saltwater intrusion is destroying our crops, our lands, and Bangladesh is an agriculture heavy country. So this is having a big impact on our economy. And alongside that, it's also causing a lot of people to lose their jobs, their income sources, right? And it's very hard for a family who has lived in a place they've called their own for generations to go somewhere else and find somewhere to call home. And Bangladesh is, as it is, very densely populated. So it's very hard for people to actually, I feel like the only reason that people are still surviving this well is because of the compassion that people show each other in such situations. We have seen that each flood, each disasters like this, people rush in to help each other out, right? But this just not only like, but I feel like this should not be the situation. Such floods should not be even allowed to happen. We should actually try to find alternative methods on how, if we cannot stop flood, then how can we make sure that all the housings, the roads, the infrastructure is safe enough for people to live when there's flood happening, right? People to survive in that area.
Well, and viewers from the Western world, or the, let's say, the wealthier countries of the world, the OECD countries, they might immediately think, oh, well, they must have some nice home insurance protection in Bangladesh that allows them to get all sorts of money to rebuild their homes and their new land somewhere else. But unfortunately, I'm sure, as you will confirm, that's very far from the reality. And I would say effectively no one whose home and lands are destroyed by flooding has any sort of form of adequate insurance. And that is increasingly an issue even in Australia, where I'm speaking to you from, one of the wealthiest countries on earth. A growing number of homes every single day are becoming technically uninsurable. So it's not just a Bangladesh problem, it's even a highly developed country's problem, which is getting worse. So how does it make you feel when when you hear that the world came together in Paris in 2015 and they came up with this wonderful Paris Climate Accord, which has now been in place for 10 years, and that every single year since that incredible agreement was made, which was a very big step forward. It wasn't a step forward nearly far enough, but it was a step forward. But nonetheless, every year since 2015, the temperature on planet Earth has increased. The amount of CO2 and other uh, climate negative emissions has increased. And the problems associated with climate change have also increased. So even if we have an agreement, the situation continues to deteriorate. And now, even in the richest country on earth, the United States, government officials are not even allowed to use the term climate change in any official government communication with one another. It's reached that level of insanity over there. 4% of the world population that is the United States of America is making and being the number one historical emitter of climate change gases, CO2 and methane, etc., now is in complete official denial mode that such a thing as climate change even exists. They, of course, withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, and they have canceled all projects on climate change around the world that the previous administration had funded. And so we really have a big uphill battle. And so, what can you say, being someone who by chance happened to be born in Bangladesh, and is forced, daily to grapple with this reality in your own country, but also within your growing network of friends and colleagues around the world that are also grappling with climate change. What sort of advice can you give, do you think?
So we have a target of getting to 1.5 degrees of increase in temperature by
Mm-hmm.
2100. And at the rate that the world is going, it is estimated to reach 4 to 5 degrees more than what will allow us to survive in this world. And honestly, it's really interesting when I read news about the global climate reports and the meetings that are being held, right? And the people who are there to represent our voices are not doing justice to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's a total lack of ownership, right? We do not own the climate change as a problem of our own. rather like a global problem for somebody, some higher authority, some united force that connects the whole world together to figure it out. And forget that it's also our individual responsibility. It is also our country's responsibility, right? It is every single person who resides on earth. It's their responsibility. And it's that lack of ownership that brings in this whole problem of people actually making policies but not acting on it, right? We are seeing meetings every single year from UNFCCCs and all the other boards that are sitting together, the forums that are sitting together, right? We are seeing so many voices being raised. And even then, it's more like a greenwashing that's happening, more youth washing that's happening. And it's honestly saddening because I see a lot of potential in the youth today, right? I see a lot of scientific research being done that could actually solve problems, at least locally, if not globally. But they are not being incentivized. They're not being put into the mainstream line. They're just it's done, the research's done, they close the book, they leave it there. It's never being brought to the reality. And I believe this is honestly very discouraging for the youth right now because we are raising our voice, we are fighting, we are bringing up, and we see that there is always constantly youth is the term that's being used a lot these days, right? Everywhere you go there, you will at least hear one youth delegate, one youth participant being there. But how much is our contribution actually being acknowledged and used and being like realized in the real world? That's the actual question, right? We are hearing that, okay, so to maintain diversity, we are bringing in a youth delegate. And then we hear their speech, very powerful speech, very meaningful. Everybody claps and it's forgotten. That's it. Maybe one line in the policy books were written and it's never implemented again, right? And that's very important for all the authorities out there who are making the decisions, right? To take into consideration. If not, then bring youth into the decision making positions, right? Because I believe the world has, I mean, I cannot directly blame the authorities, like the government, for an instance, for directly not taking care of climate change. Because to them, their responsibility is their people, their country. And that's by the book, that's what they are bound to take care of, right? And when we bring in something that's so interconnected, like climate change, right, that's so vastly impacting everybody, it's obviously not one country or one government or a one entity that can solve that problem, right? It's something that a whole network of people, organizations, entities, authorities need to work together to bring in. And I believe for that, global citizenship, the concept of global citizenship is really important. Not only it being a responsibility for the authorities to figure out, but for every individual to practice, to live in a more greener way, right? To try to reduce your carbon footprint, right? To not just, go like even simple things like not going for fast fashion, right? It's a very simple concept, but it's not something like a citizenship, like, okay, I'm a Bangladeshi citizen, so okay, I have a passport, I have an ID, done, now I'm a citizen, there's no problem, right? It's like sort of a passive thing that, okay, I got it, complete. But global citizenship is more active. It's like practicing leadership. You have to constantly be present all the time and think what you're doing, be conscious of your decisions, of your choices, how it's impacting the world, it's impacting your surroundings, right? And like bring all of those in and practice it in a daily manner, which is tough but also very easy when you figure it out what works for you, right? And I believe global citizenship could actually be the solution for problems like ownership of climate change, right? Our leaders, our authorities who are actually acting as our role model, or should be acting as our role model, they should be practicing something like global citizenship, right? When we see them practicing, like, okay, I choose to wear clothes made from local artisans who are making it in a green process, and that's encouraged into the, that's made trending, if I say, right? And that's how the whole globe will be impacted. Like, everybody will start practicing um, greener activities, eating healthier, right? Having lower carbon footprint, maybe traveling less, using less fuel transports, wasting less electricity, right? And global citizenship does not only, limit in that practices, but what makes a global citizen is the vast amount of network we have, the exchange of cultures, the exchange of ideas, the traditional methods. And in this generation where internet is so, it's free, open for everybody, it's the easiest to become a global citizen. You have all these solutions if you just search it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I want to know how I can reduce my carbon footprint, it's just a few key types away, right? And this, like, it's made so easy for us to really choose become a global citizen, that I feel like if our authorities were working in the right direction and maybe not making it a responsibility for people, but rather a lifestyle, and them living by the life choices like that, it could have easily become a solution that did not need so much political, economic involvement and a fight over the things that are happening right now. And honestly, the recent COP that happened and the budget that was fixed, it was interesting, I would say, that the targets that were set for everybody was not even met by 10 to 15% of what was put together by all the countries. And coming back to the question you asked about how I feel as a Bangladeshi citizen when I see that we are one of the most vulnerable countries because of the climate adversities that are happening around the world, and how I see the people who are responsible for it to take actions regarding it. It's honestly, I feel like we don't even have time to be sad about it or grieve that, okay, nobody's out there to help us, because we genuinely don't have time, right? Rather, we would prefer to work with everybody in the world, because it's not just our problem. If they are not being affected now, soon they will be. But I know that all the countries around the world are being affected one way or the other, be it a drought, a forest fire, flash floods, right? There's one or other way that the climate is leaving an impact behind, a negative impact behind in each and every country. So I believe and I hope actually that every country comes together to bring a collective solution, right? For not only just for governments to practice, but for citizens, the world citizens, to practice together to actually see and to actually realize the future we envision.
Well, that's a great vision. What would you say to the unfortunately still very large number of people who would not consider themselves to be world citizens? People that are afraid of the idea, people that are deeply nationalistic about the greatness of their special country and their special people, who really don't care very much about the rest of the human race out there. What do you think are the ways to get through to those people that you have found to work in your limited years on Earth so far?
Thank you for asking that question, because that brought into a memory of me working in one of the fields. And this reminds me that once I was actually working at a local area where we were working with old age homes. And over there, I was just spending some time talking to a few grandmas over there. And I was telling them about like simply about how I'm an environmental science student, right? So I was telling them about how my experiences, fieldworks go, and they were asking me, why do you do it? Like, like why are you going and planting trees somewhere that's like hours away from your house, right? And I was telling them, like, these are the things, this is how it happens, right? And when I told, like, in the beginning, they were like, you're wasting money, wasting time. Why are you doing this? Like, rather focus on something better that will give you money, right? And that's like the how people think, right? How I'm, if I'm, whether I'm earning, whether I'm gaining. And when I explain to them, right, how it's actually benefiting us all and it's contributing to our future together, and it's not something that I'm giving away but doing for myself, right? And when I told them in details of why and how I'm doing it, I realized that it's just that they don't know what's why it's done. They just know the first two lines of the whole story and determine to, okay, this is not my piece of cake and move away, right? But when they actually got the in-depth vision of why and what and how it's being done, I saw a change. I saw that, okay, they were like interested. They were like, okay, then, you should get more people in it. Why are not more people not doing it? And it's because people just don't know the details of it. And for those who do know and are, you know, still not getting into this path, I would say for at least for young people, all the people I've met, I haven't met a lot, right? But the ones I know, and that's a diverse group of people because I go to a university where there's 17 different countries from South Asia studying together, right? And it's really not the young people, the youth, that do not claim to, accept that climate change is happening or do not want to transition into a more global citizenship or maybe a greener lifestyle. Firstly, it's the expense of living a greener life. Because if you look into it, if I'm trying to be a vegetarian for a second, right? It will cost me more per meal to have veg food than have non-veg in in our everyday regular day, right? If I want to have something that's more green, and the label has like it's green or like the process was green, it costs a few cents more, maybe a few dollars more, few takas more, right? So it's hard for like, maybe students who actually understand and want to participate in this for them to afford living a greener lifestyle, right? Or maybe for them to afford to make a change um, at times. But it's like you don't always need money for it, but also for something like changing your lifestyle, which also involves you earning, it's a bit more complicated, right? And I have seen that so this is like from young people's side. I know a lot of people, they understand and accept it, but are just unable to process it. And I feel like the government should actually try to maybe remove taxes or make the greener producers more easily accessible to the people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
alongside that, I feel like other than young people, mostly I feel like the elder generations are the ones who want to reject the idea of climate change or global citizenship because they are very much comfortable in the way they have grown up already. Because that time, global citizenship was not the idea, was not what people were working for. So a lot of people just like not changing, right? You have already developed into something that you're very comfortable in. You just don't want to take off that jacket and try on a new one. And that's what it's happening for them. It's just a one step away that somebody tells them that the other jacket is better, right? And somebody pushing them to just take it off and try it on. And they would maybe get to know that they made the right choice finally, right? So that's what I think is going on for the global citizenship and why people are not adapting to it more.
Yeah, and I think that you've been able to travel a little bit so far. I'm sure you will travel much more throughout your life, but simply going to places and understanding that, as this philosopher Ken Wilber always says, the map is not the territory. You have to see the actual place and meet the actual people and be there standing on the ground, smelling the air, eating the food, hearing the music to truly understand what's going on in that place. And you know, certainly for me, and I think millions of others who have had the good fortune of, working in the social change field our entire lives, but also going to these places in all corners of the world. Every single time you do it, you just get yet more confirmation that everybody ultimately is the same, you know? And we want essentially the same things. And we care about essentially the same things. And we don't want our children to suffer. And we don't want our friends to suffer. And we can be very proud of our countries, but at the same time we're proud to be occupants of Earth, and we don't want people in places, particularly where we have been or where we know people, but really everywhere, to suffer unnecessarily due to human-made decisions. And I think that's the stage more and more of us have to reach. And through these interactions between people, through greater and greater communication, hopefully we can use current and very recent technological advances to bring this idea further, instead of how it's been used in the last 10 or 20 years, which has been a tool to drive us apart artificially, of course. But those who wish to control everything want to divide people and make them see each other as different, and somehow create an us versus them situation, when in fact we're all in this together, no matter how you slice it. Climate change will affect us all, but so will global peace and security, so will the health of the oceans, so will the health of the economy, so will trade. Everything will affect everybody somehow, someplace, all the time. So I think it's that idea of ancient thinkers throughout the ages of all religions have always said something to the effect of see yourself in others, then who can you harm? Because all of us are at our core essentially the same. We just happen to be born where we were born, and we just happen to live where we live. But the thing that we all share is that we were all born on the same planet, and this planet is finite and this planet is fragile, and we need to really come together and do what we can to ensure the prosperity and positive future for everyone, not just those who already have, but for everybody, in particular those who have less. And if you look at the world today, the amount of inequality is staggering and probably never been as bad as it is today. And it's those kind of structural changes that we need to make through our growing awareness as world citizens that we can actually achieve the far better world that we know is just around the corner. If enough of us want it and enough of us dedicate ourselves to achieving it, we can get there. But it will be an uphill battle. And of course, climate change is horrendous, and I've been working on it far longer than you've been on this earth, and I will continue to do so. But we need to find ways whereby we see climate change, of course, as a negative force, but also something that can potentially bring us together in ways we've never been brought together before, because it affects everyone, And I hope very much that my generation, the generation between us, and your generation can really, use climate change as a force for good in the end, and use that negative, force and the consequences that it brings to drive us together instead of apart. And then that way we can find, solutions that benefit everybody. So just a couple more questions, before we wrap it up today. So what is it that gives you hope right now, and how can you share that message with others from, Gen Z or Gen I, whatever you want to call your current generation? What is it? Because most kids that are 20, I call you kids, young adults who are 20. Many of them don't even know what they want to do with their lives yet. And clearly you've made a number of decisions already that are, based upon trying to tackle climate change, make Bangladesh and the world a better place. So, what can you say to the younger generation, people your age that are sitting on the fence and they don't know what to do with their lives? And as you alluded to with the elderly people you saw in that village, why are you doing this work? How can you possibly make a living doing this work? Because I know I throughout my entire life doing human rights work, people made similar comments to me all around the world, like how can you possibly make a living doing that, And you can, you
Yeah.
can and you do, and you figure out ways to do it. So what can you say to other 20 somethings around the world who are thinking about going into investment banking or working on Wall Street or working in the financial district of Dhaka, and instead dedicate their lives to making the world a better place.
Okay. Firstly, when you say that I've made some number of decisions, I did, but I still don't think I've figured out life, because do you ever figure out life, right?
True.
But what I know is what my decisions are driven by what values I have, right? So it's what priorities I set for myself. So I prioritize having good health above anything, right? Having good networks, good family, good friends, right? And those are all the things that you don't really like, you cannot leave the climate out of it. If your surroundings are not good, you're not having your good health, a good mental health, a good physical health, right? You're not having good network around you, not having actual, true, meaningful connections, right? So I don't want whoever's listening to this to hear, okay, she has her life figured out, and be scared that, okay, I need to make decisions, because you don't. Really, just go with what feels like the right thing to do, even if people say it's the wrong thing to do, because people will say it, right? We have been conditioned to think in a way that only benefits the economy, that only benefits like some societal expectations, right? And it's not necessary for us to always meet those expectations and be like, it's not, we're not going to be wrong if we are not meeting those expectations, because at the end of the day you will see that whatever journey that you choose and you stick with it, you will end up in the right place if you make the right decisions and you press the right buttons, right? So there's this, when you asked about an advice, one specific thing that my mom says to me all the time, just it just popped out in my head, and it's, nature is the solution, and the solution is in the nature, right? So it's the same, like it sounds like the same thing, but it's two different portions. That nature is the solution, so ultimately whatever we end up doing, we will always we came from the nature and we'll be going back to the nature, right? So whatever our life is doing in the whole life process, we should be living in such a way that we are one with the nature, right? And we don't go back with guilt that, okay, I couldn't do this or I did this wrong. And then nature is the solution is something she tells me when I feel lost and I don't know what to do, or I'm like, okay, what to study next, or even as simple as like, I don't even know if my life's going in the right direction, right? And then she says, nature's like the solutions in the nature. So look into the nature, see how it's going. Maybe just go out, sit in the grass, look at the sky for a few hours. Maybe you'll figure it out, right? Because there is no given solution, there's no guidebook for life. And nature is one of the big parts of who we are. So it's essential for us to always look back, no matter what sector we choose to work in, right? You don't necessarily have to work in an environmental science as an environmental scientist or like a biologist or something that's in like entirely thinking about climate only or nature only, biodiversity only. You could work anywhere and still contribute to climate change and contribute to having a better impact on this world, right? You could actually be working, studying economics and working with climate economics and actually trying to get more fund into this field, right? You could be studying politics and trying to get the world to actually address the problems that we have, and instead of trying to find other ways and distracting people by even distracting people by other things that are not as important as climate changes right now. So if to conclude, that would be my word of advice. The nature is the solution, and the solution is in the nature. Yeah.
Well, that was very wonderfully said and totally correct as well, without a doubt. And you know, we have been doing things in Bangladesh for many years with the organization that you work for now, Young Power in Social Action, which was, of course, founded by your father many, many years ago when he was young. He still pretends he's young, but he hasn't changed the name of IPSA yet. But one of the things that we've done with them is this one house, one family at a time project, which is a small project. I mean, I wish it was a huge project, but it's where we try to raise a little bit of money, and when there's enough, we send it to your colleagues, and they basically arrange for houses to be built for climate displaced families, highly vulnerable climate displaced families. And we've built about 16 houses so far, and hopefully the next round we'll build another 10 or 20. But that's one little thing that a little one of my small NGOs can do to make things just a little bit better, and hopefully it inspires others to create similar programs in other countries. And um, that's the least we can do, particularly from the global north, who's overwhelmingly responsible for the CO2 gases that are causing climate change and all of the effects around the world, including in Bangladesh. So, hopefully everybody can find their own way. And, as you were saying, everybody has to find, their own way. And some people will obviously pursue greed and money alone and power and all of these things that some people choose to pursue. But I think you discovered at a very young age that doing work in the service of others and in the service of humanity, not just your own country, but alleviating human suffering everywhere, is you know for people like us who have already decided that, it's the most rewarding of all possible ways of working. And certainly for me, and hopefully for you, and I'm sure most of people from IPSA and beyond, that is the path they will continue to follow, because nothing is better, really. And we need more of us, and we need more of us to also embrace this idea that ultimately our planet and our species are going to be better served if we focus more on unity and coming together and finding common ground, finding ways to share our experiences and understand each other better, and in the end have a world that is truly governed not only on the basis of 193 nation states, each of whom is fighting against the others for interests and money and power, but a world where all of us ultimately share legally, not just theoretically or metaphorically, but legally, the same passport and the same nationality and the same legal rights and responsibilities towards ourselves and towards everyone else and towards the planet as a whole. And that's our vision for democracy tomorrow. Building those institutions, building those pathways, building understanding between people that build the world that we all ultimately deserve, which is one that's far, far better than the world that we have all inherited. And it's up to us to, continue to push for that. And if Afra Nawar Rahman and Scott Lecky can get along so nicely in an hour, why can't everybody everywhere get along in the same manner? Because, again, what we share is so much more than what divides us. So, Afra, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you to everybody who's watched us. If you'd like to find Afra, I'm sure you can find her via the IPSA website, which is ypsa.org, an incredible NGO that's now been around 30 to, what is it, 30 years, 35 years? 40
14 years.
years, 40 years already, and has offices throughout Bangladesh, has quite literally thousands of staff members, um, and does incredible things to benefit the most vulnerable sectors of that incredible and beautiful and wonderful country of Bangladesh, which I hope to visit again very soon. So, Afra, thank you so much. It was wonderful talking to you tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and you're most welcome to come back to Bangladesh again.
Okay, I'll take you up on the offer for sure. That'll be great. Okay, thank you so much, Afra. We'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you.